What happens when absolute power meets private obsession? For over 1,000 years, the British royal family has ruled kingdoms by day and unraveled behind velvet curtains by night. Some were lovers, some were liars, some were legends. But all of them shared one thing, a scandal so potent it refused to stay buried. This isn't gossip. This is history with its gloves off. And tonight, we open the palace gates, not to see the crown, but to see what it was hiding. Welcome to 33 British royals with the most horrible sexual reputations. Before we slip any deeper into royal ruin, make sure you're subscribed. This rabbit hole only gets darker. And while you're here, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight? Noon? Somewhere in between? Let's see who else is wide awake with curiosity. 1. King Charles II. They didn't call him the Merry Monarch because he told good jokes. They called him that because his court was basically an aristocratic after-party that never ended. Charles II ruled with a goblet in one hand and a mistress in the other. Official ones, plural, publicly housed and state-funded like national monuments. He fathered at least a dozen illegitimate children, which sounds almost responsible given the amount of time he spent not being responsible. Barbara Villiers, Nell Gwyn, Louise de Carouaille. His romantic roster read like a Restoration-era reality show, and he didn't exactly hide it. Parliament wagged its powdered finger. Priests tried to scold him into decency, but Charles just laughed. The kind of laugh that said, "I already disbanded you once. I'll do it again." When he died, his brother James took the throne, and unfortunately, a few too many of Charles's worst habits along with it. 2. King Edward VII. Albert Edward. Before he was king, he was Bertie, the playboy prince with an appetite so famously unquenchable that French furniture makers literally invented a chair to help him cheat on his wife more comfortably. It had stirrups. His marriage to Alexandra of Denmark was mostly for photographs and public obligations. Privately, he was cycling through Parisian courtesans, London actresses, and society women with the precision of someone who viewed adultery as a sport. His affair with Lady Daisy Greville was so indiscreet it nearly became official policy. Brothels whispered his name like folklore. He was caught in scandals, implicated in divorces, and still managed to become a beloved old monarch simply by outliving everyone who could testify. People say Edward VII modernized the monarchy, but it might be more accurate to say he gave it a velvet smoking jacket and told it to loosen up. His son, however, wouldn't get quite so lucky. 2 kings in, and already the monarchy's looking more like a masquerade ball than a moral compass. If you're into history that doesn't behave, hit subscribe. We've got 31 more scandals to go. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it on your end? Midnight doom scroll or afternoon deep dive? Let's compare clocks across the chaos. 3. King George IV, Prince Regent. Imagine a man so scandalous he got banned from his own father's funeral. That was George IV. He started early, secretly marrying a Catholic widow, Maria Fitzherbert, which was both illegal and deeply embarrassing. Then he married Caroline of Brunswick out of political necessity, despised her immediately, and spent the rest of their lives trying to ruin hers. His affairs weren't affairs. They were multi-season catastrophes with courtroom sequels. Mistresses came and went, lawsuits followed, newspapers had a field day. He was once sued for criminal conversation, the 19th century way of saying, "You're sleeping with my wife." And he was, constantly. George drank like a sailor, gambled like he owned the treasury, and posed for paintings like he was a Greek god. His sexual reputation was less libertine and more accidental human scandal machine, but even his chaos would pale next to the man who followed, his brother, James. 4. James II. He was a Catholic in a Protestant kingdom. That alone would have made things messy. But James also had a spectacular talent for selecting mistresses no one liked and flaunting them at the worst possible moments. He had at least 4 illegitimate children before breakfast, and a new scandal by lunch. His affairs weren't just personal. They were political, ideological, explosive. And if he wasn't seducing courtiers, he was promoting them, triggering Parliament like a man lighting fireworks inside a powder keg. His second wife, Mary of Modena, didn't slow him down much. In fact, her fertility only deepened the nation's paranoia. Was the royal bedchamber now a threat to national security? James's libido became one more reason to distrust his entire regime. When he fled the throne, it wasn't just because he lost a battle. It was because no one could take another scandal. The man who replaced him, though, wasn't exactly chaste either. 5. King Henry VIII. If you think being married 6 times is scandalous, try being responsible for 2 executions, multiple mistresses, a religious reformation, and a nation that aged 40 years in the space of one marriage. Henry VIII didn't just rewrite the rules of love, he bulldozed them with a flaming warhorse. His court was a revolving door of ambition, flirtation, and sudden death. Anne Boleyn caught his eye with her wit, lost her head when she failed to deliver a son. Catherine Howard was young, foolish, and doomed from the moment she stepped into the king's gaze. Even Henry's supposed monogamous phases were riddled with whispered affairs and courtly gossip. Women weren't lovers, they were battlegrounds. And by the end of his life, Henry was more myth than man, a bloated specter of romantic destruction. But his son Edward didn't last long, and the throne would soon fall to someone with fewer wives but no less suspicion. 6. King Charles. Charles was a man of contradictions, shy but proud, pious yet oddly enigmatic. His reign ended in regicide, but long before the axe fell, the whispers had started, not about war or money, but about the curious intensity of his male friendships. George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, was the most persistent name. The kind of closeness they shared made courtiers raise their eyebrows and poets sharpen their pens. Letters between them read like love poems, affectionate, poetic, unguarded. Of course, Charles married Henrietta Maria, and together they had a swarm of children. But that didn't hush the court gossip. Was his devotion to Buckingham political, platonic, something more? No one dared ask out loud, until they did. And once they did, no one could unhear it. After all, in a kingdom on the brink of collapse, nothing stirred the public more than the suspicion that their king might be emotionally entangled, in the wrong direction. 7. Mary, Queen of Scots. To this day, no one can decide if Mary Stuart was a romantic naïf or a calculated survivor, maybe both. She had the misfortune of beauty, youth, and power, all at once. That made her irresistible to men and infuriating to politicians. Her marriage to Lord Darnley began as a love match and ended in murder. His. Then came Bothwell, a man she either married out of passion or coercion, depending on which historian you ask. Either way, her enemies painted the union as confirmation of every sexual sin they could imagine. Adultery, conspiracy, debauchery, and perhaps worst of all, female autonomy. Her downfall wasn't just political, it was reputational. The image of Mary as a scandalous queen burned into the Protestant imagination for centuries. But it didn't die with her. If anything, it planted a seed. The idea that a queen's bedroom was never just her own. 8. Queen Anne. If Queen Anne had loved men, she might have been remembered as tragic. Because she loved women, emotionally, intimately, and with a kind of devotion that alarmed her courtiers, she became something else entirely, a question mark wrapped in whispers. Her bond with Sarah Churchill was so intense it destabilized a government. Letters between them overflowed with longing, jealousy, and heartbreak. And when that relationship soured, Anne replaced Sarah with Abigail Masham, sparking another political storm. Was it romantic? Emotional? Power-driven? Depends who you ask. Her enemies claimed she was ruled by lust. Her defenders insisted it was loneliness. But either way, her reign was punctuated by an unusual drama, a queen whose most dangerous affairs were not with generals or foreign agents, but with women who knew how to manipulate her heart. It wasn't sex that scandalized Britain. It was the implication that love itself might be ungovernable. 9. Queen Elizabeth III. The Virgin Queen. That was the brand. But Elizabeth's actual reputation was far from celibate. Her court was a stage for whispered flirtations and breathless gossip. Robert Dudley was the most infamous, childhood friend turned shadowy almost husband. They were inseparable, emotionally fused, and conveniently ignored the existence of Dudley's unfortunate wife, who ended up mysteriously dead at the bottom of a staircase. Coincidence? The court didn't think so. Later, the Earl of Essex stepped into the spotlight, younger and reckless. Their correspondence had the heat of late-night confessions and the politics of a chess match. Elizabeth never married, but that didn't stop her subjects from obsessing over who exactly she belonged to. The irony? In a world where marriage defined a woman's worth, Elizabeth weaponized her singlehood. She turned speculation into power. And while her virginity was a myth, it was her most useful one, until her cousin Mary fell and Catherine Howard's ghost came knocking next. 10. Catherine Howard. She was barely a teenager when she caught the eye of the king, and by then, Henry VIII had already lost 2 wives and most of his patience. Catherine Howard was lively, charming, and doomed. Her past, fleeting flirtations, adolescent encounters, teenage secrets, was dragged into the royal spotlight and rebranded as treason. But was it seduction or survival? Historians can't agree. What's certain is this: she was accused of misconduct before and after her royal wedding, interrogated, betrayed, and ultimately abandoned. The tragedy wasn't just that she died, it was that she was punished for being young in a court that preyed on youth. Catherine was a girl thrown into the arms of a man who devoured wives like political contracts. Her mistake was forgetting she had no room to make mistakes. The Tudor court moved on, but her legacy lingered, just long enough for Mary Boleyn to step out of the shadows. 11. Mary Boleyn. If Anne Boleyn was the queen who changed history, Mary was the sister who changed Henry's bedsheets first. She was the royal mistress before it became fashionable or dangerous. Their affair wasn't exactly private, nor was it scandalous enough to end her marriage, but it was messy. And the messiness only got worse when Mary's children started to resemble the king a little too much. Gossip exploded. Were her kids Henry's? Were they threats to the line of succession? No one ever confirmed. That was the most scandalous part. It remained unanswered. After Anne's rise and fall, Mary vanished from court life, quietly remarried beneath her station, and lived out her days in a kind of exile. But her name never left the royal rumor mill. She was the shadow figure behind a throne, a living reminder that even the less ambitious Boleyn sister had secrets no historian can fully unwrap. 12. Prince George, Duke of Kent. Prince George had a talent for being photographed just before everything fell apart. Handsome, stylish, and dangerously charismatic, he floated through the early 20th century like a man in search of the next indulgence. His associations were varied: heiresses, actresses, singers, and, if the rumors were true, men. He was the royal wild card, the one who made Buckingham Palace nervous every time his name surfaced in the press. Whispers of affairs, chaotic friendships, secret letters. Some claimed he fathered illegitimate children. Others swore he had dangerous ties to people the monarchy preferred to forget. Then came the tragic plane crash. Officially an accident, unofficially a magnet for conspiracy. His death didn't silence the speculation. It amplified it. What had he known? Who had he been involved with? And why did his name never quite disappear from the files of curious biographers? The royal family may have buried him, but his legend stayed wide awake. 13. Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. She was born too early to be free and just late enough to be scandalous. Margaret was the beautiful younger sister, the one who smoked long cigarettes, wore Dior in daylight, and fell in love with men who made her life impossible. Peter Townsend was her greatest heartbreak, a divorcee whose very existence forced her to choose between the monarchy and love. She chose the monarchy, but she never forgave it. After that, it was one affair after another, some discreet, others plastered across tabloid covers. Her marriage to Anthony Armstrong Jones was a theater of tension, infidelity, and cold glamour. The press called her wild. Her friends called her wounded. And Margaret? She just smiled, lit another cigarette, and gave the public exactly what they were forbidden to expect from a royal woman: a personality. But as she faded into scandal fatigue, her uncle Edward VIII still loomed in the public memory like a royal ghost. 14. Prince Edward, Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII. He gave up a throne for love, but the love itself made people squint. Wallis Simpson was American, divorced, and impervious to royal expectations. Their affair was less a fairy tale and more a geopolitical migraine. While Britain whispered, Edward did not care. He flaunted Wallis at court functions before it was remotely acceptable. He ignored warnings, defied Parliament, and ultimately abdicated the throne just so he could marry her. But their story didn't soften with time. Pre-Wallis, Edward had already made a name for himself in elite circles with rumored entanglements and a tendency to be emotionally inconsistent. And post-abdication, the couple's social circle included fascists, exiles, and just enough uncomfortable associations to keep MI5 awake at night. The scandal wasn't just that he loved Wallis. It was what he was willing to destroy: his family, his nation's stability, his own legacy, to do it. Still, he wasn't the only royal whose marriage exploded on impact. 15. Queen Caroline of Brunswick. George IV hated her so much, it became public policy. Their marriage was arranged, short-lived, and epically dysfunctional. Caroline was accused of everything from adultery to indecency, most of which stemmed from her simply refusing to be humiliated quietly. After their separation, she traveled Europe with an entourage of musicians, dancers, and mysterious companions, enough to make the English press foam with accusation. When George tried to divorce her via parliamentary spectacle, the resulting trial was less a legal proceeding and more a live tabloid. Witnesses accused her of unseemly behavior. Satirists immortalized her as a queen of excess. Public support flipped in her favor, not because people thought she was innocent, but because they liked her more than her husband. She tried to attend his coronation and was physically barred. Days later, she died. And yet even in death, she remained a symbol of royal chaos, feminine defiance, and scandal that wouldn't be silenced. 16. Lady Caroline Lamb. She wasn't technically royal, but scandal doesn't care about technicalities. Lady Caroline Lamb married into the aristocracy and launched herself straight into the center of 19th century high society, then detonated. Her affair with Lord Byron wasn't just romantic. It was theatrical, obsessive, and very, very public. She famously described him as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, which might also have applied to herself. After he ended things, she stalked him with poetic vengeance, sending him her own pubic hair in the mail, a detail that horrified even Regency London. She once showed up to a party dressed as a page boy, then slashed her own arm in front of guests. People were scandalized, then fascinated, then scandalized again. Her behavior wasn't simply erratic, it broke the code of silence that governed women's inner lives. She was too loud, too sensual, too wounded, which made her the perfect cautionary tale, just in time for another woman on Henry's list. 17. Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr is remembered as the survivor, the sixth wife who outlived Henry VIII. But long before she became royal property, Catherine had a love life full of its own quiet transgressions. Twice widowed, she was intelligent, pious, and deeply romantic, which was a dangerous combination in Tudor England. When Henry proposed, she was already in love with Thomas Seymour, brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour. Their correspondence revealed emotional intensity and barely restrained longing. She married Henry anyway, perhaps out of duty, perhaps to protect herself. But after the king's death, she reunited with Seymour in a move that shocked the court. Their marriage was passionate, erratic, and ultimately destructive. Rumors flew about Seymour's behavior toward Catherine's young stepdaughter, Princess Elizabeth, and Catherine's final months were marked by stress, jealousy, and unease. She died in childbirth, her last chapter barely written, leaving behind a tangle of letters and questions that made even her survival feel like a tragic footnote. 18. Queen Isabella of Angoulême. In the early 13th century, Queen Isabella was known for two things: beauty and trouble. Married to King John at the age of 12, she was thrust into royal chaos before she could spell it. Chroniclers described her as dangerously attractive, with influence far beyond her years. But it was after John's death that the stories truly multiplied. As Queen Dowager, Isabella returned to France and reportedly surrounded herself with lovers, many of them younger, many of them knights sworn to protect her. These weren't just rumors whispered in dark corners. They made their way into court records, church condemnations, and angry political documents. Was she truly promiscuous, or just a woman exercising the autonomy her position allowed? No one agreed. But what made her infamous wasn't the relationships themselves. It was the fact that she didn't try to hide. She was bold, unapologetic, and perhaps most offensive of all, politically useful to no one. 19. Henrietta Maria of France. Henrietta Maria didn't do subtle. Married to Charles I, she was Catholic in a violently Protestant land, foreign in a paranoid kingdom, and emotionally volatile in a court obsessed with restraint. Her closeness to her French attendants, especially male courtiers, sparked endless gossip. Political enemies accused her of pulling her husband's strings, not with policy but with intimacy. The English public saw her as a dangerous seductress, corrupting the king not just spiritually but sensually. Art didn't help. Paintings showed her draped in silks, gazing at Charles with unsettling affection. Was it love? Lust? Codependency? Critics framed her influence as sexualized manipulation, weaponized emotion. She fled England when the Civil War erupted, but her legends stayed behind, painted in pamphlets, whispered in Parliament, condemned from pulpits. For a queen with little official power, she left a long stain on royal reputation. And when she left, someone even more performative took her place, on stage and in bed. 20. Nell Gwyn. She sold oranges in a theater and ended up in the royal bedchamber. Nell Gwyn was Charles II's most beloved mistress, not because she was the most noble, but because she was the most entertaining. Cockney-accented, witty, and irreverently bawdy, she rose from nothing to become a national celebrity. She was the original people's mistress, mocking aristocrats and charming the king with the same breath. Unlike her competitors, she didn't pretend to be virtuous. She leaned into the image of the scandalous woman and made it part of her power. When mistaken for a Catholic rival, she allegedly shouted, "I'm the Protestant whore," turning insult into identity. She bore the king 2 sons and was rewarded with a house, a pension, and national affection. But her success was always precarious. Behind the laughter was a brutal truth. She was tolerated as long as she entertained. And beside her, a far more calculating rival took her turn. 21. Barbara Villiers, Duchess of Cleveland. Barbara Villiers wasn't just a royal mistress. She was a political institution. Tall, commanding, and impossible to ignore, she became Charles II's favorite with terrifying efficiency. While others competed for attention, Barbara dominated. She had 5 of the king's children, titles, lands, and influence over everything from court appointments to military commissions. But it wasn't just her power that scandalized, it was her brazenness. Affairs weren't hidden, they were flaunted. She paraded her lovers, insulted her rivals, and navigated court politics like a chess master. Her beauty was legendary, but so was her temper. Even when Charles tried to distance himself, she reappeared, more dramatic than before. Her legacy wasn't about love, it was about control. She understood something other mistresses didn't. Scandal, when weaponized correctly, could be its own form of loyalty. But as her reign waned, a darker figure emerged. Less flamboyant, more dangerous, and the subject of increasingly strange rumors. 22. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. He was second in line to the throne and first in line for public suspicion. Prince Albert Victor, known to friends as Eddie, never seemed quite comfortable in his role, or his skin. He was charming in photographs, awkward in conversation, and plagued by rumors that never fully died. At various points, he was accused of everything from secret affairs with men to being the infamous culprit behind the Whitechapel murders. A theory long debunked, but stubbornly fascinating. Eddie's name was whispered in connection with brothels, scandals, and moral panics that blurred fact with fantasy. The royal family buried the noise under carefully staged appearances and polished silence. But when he died young, just before he could marry Princess Mary, questions multiplied instead of fading. His death was sudden, his life half-lived, and his legacy, strangely unfinished. The monarchy never spoke of it again. But decades later, his distant cousin would spark a scandal no spin doctor could contain. 23. Prince Andrew, Duke of York. If royal scandal were currency, Prince Andrew's tab would bankrupt a small nation. Once called the Playboy Prince in the tabloids, his charm curdled into something far less flattering. His associations with controversial billionaires, his increasingly bizarre interviews, and his disastrous attempts at reputation management turned whispers into headlines. The issue wasn't just what he may or may not have done, it was how unbothered he seemed by the consequences. As questions mounted, so did the palace's silence. Then came the slow-motion PR implosion. Royal titles stripped, duties removed, a man fading into the background while refusing to admit the background was shrinking. Unlike scandals of centuries past, this one couldn't be buried in dusty letters or ambiguous portraits. It lived online. It lived on camera. And for the first time in royal history, a family known for surviving anything had to decide whether one of its own was worth the cost of survival. 24. King William III. William of Orange wasn't romantic. He was pragmatic. He invaded his father-in-law's kingdom, shared the throne with his wife, and ruled with the cold efficiency of a man who preferred strategy to sentiment. But that didn't stop the gossip. His close relationships with male courtiers, especially William Bentinck and later Arnold van Keppel, were noted for their intensity. He showered them with titles, gifts, and positions of influence, raising eyebrows and blood pressure across Europe. Critics didn't whisper, they published. Pamphlets accused him of unnatural preferences, foreign corruption, and dangerous attachments. He ignored most of it. After all, he wasn't trying to charm the public. He was trying to keep the Protestant throne from collapsing. But the rumors clung to him like smoke to fabric. Centuries later, historians still debate. Was it favoritism? Friendship? Something more? The answer remains locked inside letters and silences, just like the king who came before him, whose favorites were even more infamous. 25. King James III. He united England and Scotland, survived conspiracies, and translated the Bible. But court gossip preferred to talk about his lap. Specifically, who got to sit in it. James. I had a pattern. Male favorites promoted well beyond their qualifications, relationships infused with affection, and letters that read like 17th century love songs. Robert Parr and George Villiers were the two best known, handsome, ambitious, and controversial. Their rapid ascent to power caused rifts in court and public distrust. James referred to Villiers as my sweet child and wife, which didn't exactly help his PR. Was it just flowery language? Maybe, but the political consequences were real. Factionalism, jealousy, and a king increasingly ruled by those closest to his heart, or ego. James claimed divine right, but the earthly speculation never stopped. He wasn't the first royal to elevate a favorite, but he might have been the one who made it feel the most like a love triangle with a crown. 26. Princess Louise, Duchess of Argyll. Among Queen Victoria's children, Princess Louise stood out, not just for her beauty, but for her refusal to act like royalty. She was artistic, fiercely intelligent, and restless within the gilded cage of royal life. Rumors followed her like a shadow. Affairs with sculptors, tutors, and even a possible romantic relationship with her married art teacher were whispered behind palace walls. One scandalous theory even suggested she gave birth to a secret child, quietly adopted out to preserve the family's image. There's no confirmed proof, only patterns of disappearance, sudden transfers, and silence where records should be. What is known? Louise was unconventional, unhappy, and often exiled to the edges of royal society. Her marriage to the Marquis of Lorne was formal, strained, and reportedly loveless. But even in her isolation, she remained quietly defiant. Louise wasn't trying to embarrass the monarchy. She simply refused to disappear into it, and neither would her mother. 27. Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria is remembered as the matriarch of an empire, the symbol of restraint. But in her private life, she was anything but restrained. Her passionate devotion to Prince Albert bordered on obsessive. Letters reveal a woman overcome with desire, jealousy, and emotional need. After his death, she entered a state of mourning so complete it became part of her identity. But what raised more eyebrows were her later relationships, especially with John Brown, her Scottish servant, and Abdul Karim, her Indian attendant. Both men gained startling access to the Queen's inner circle. Both were accused of exploiting her affections, and both became lightning rods for speculation. Was it just emotional closeness? Was there more? The palace denied everything, but courtiers fumed, records were altered, and portraits were quietly removed. Victoria may have ruled an era of moral rigidity, but behind closed doors, she blurred the lines between propriety and passion in ways no one could fully explain. 28. Princess Diana, Princess of Wales. If Queen Victoria buried her emotions, Diana broadcast hers. She turned the stiff upper lip into a tear-streaked confessional and made the world watch as her fairy tale marriage crumbled. Her relationships outside the palace, James Hewitt, Hasnat Khan, Dodi Fayed, were dissected not just by tabloids but by historians. Each name came with theories, timelines, conspiracies. Her lovers weren't just men, they were symbols of defiance against an institution that had failed her. Diana didn't hide. She walked through landmines, posed for portraits, gave interviews that cracked Buckingham Palace like an egg. And yet, behind the glamour, there was deep pain. She wasn't reckless, she was wounded. Her romantic life became public property, her heartbreak monetized. But in reclaiming her voice, she rewrote what it meant to be a royal woman. Still, her most famous relationship wasn't with a lover, but with a man who couldn't stop looking over his shoulder at someone else. 29. Prince Charles, now King Charles III. He married Diana but was in love with Camilla, and he wasn't subtle about it. The entire nation watched as their future king fumbled his personal life in public. There were phone calls, tabloid leaks, and a particularly unfortunate transcript that became late-night comedy. For years, Charles was seen as the villain in a story about a princess. But his romantic missteps were less about betrayal and more about misalignment. He was born to duty. He wanted poetry. Camilla, with her unshakable presence and unfiltered charm, made sense to him in a way Diana never did. But public opinion doesn't care about emotional compatibility. Charles was judged by tradition, not by truth. The affair became one of the most damaging royal scandals in modern history. And yet, after decades of chaos, he married her. The mistress became the queen. But if Charles's reputation survived, it's because someone else took the heat next, someone quieter, older, and wrapped in myth. 30. Queen Elizabeth. The Queen Mother, as young Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. To the public, she was the smiling grandmother of the nation, the steel spine in a pastel hat. But long before her wartime popularity and crown-wearing diplomacy, young Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon moved through upper-class society with a peculiar magnetism. Not scandalous in the traditional sense, but emotionally complex enough to leave questions that never quite settled. Persistent rumors have circled for decades, quiet whispers about intense relationships in her youth, particularly a deeply affectionate bond with a married nobleman that, if true, would have cast her early royal image into a very different light. Some accounts suggest she refused Prince Albert's proposal multiple times, possibly due to other entanglements. Officially, she was the pure-hearted bride who humanized the monarchy. Unofficially, there are gaps, missing letters, softened timelines, and loyal friends who refused to speak. The monarchy needed her spotless. But the woman beneath the legend may have been much harder to categorize, especially compared to the warrior king who came next. 31. Richard the Lionheart. History painted Richard I as a crusading icon, a medieval superhero with a sword in one hand and divine favor in the other. But the man behind the legend was far more complicated and far more whispered about. His prolonged bachelorhood and unusually intense emotional relationships with certain male companions sparked centuries of speculation. Chroniclers tiptoed around it. Later historians debated it. His close bond with King Philip II of France was described with language so romantic it blurred the line between diplomacy and devotion. At one point they shared a bed, not an unusual act for royals negotiating alliances, but notable enough to raise eyebrows even then. Richard eventually married Berengaria of Navarre, though there's little evidence they ever lived as husband and wife. His reputation as a fearless warrior eclipsed all else, but his private life remains wrapped in ambiguity. Was he misunderstood, mischaracterized, or merely misremembered? Whatever the truth, the man who followed had none of his mystique, just his menace. 32. King John. If Richard was the heroic ghost of England's past, John was the living cautionary tale. Villainous even in contemporary accounts, King John's reputation was one of lechery, tyranny, and spectacular personal failure. Chroniclers accused him of aggressively pursuing noblewomen, harassing their families, and maintaining a network of coerced relationships that blurred the line between royal privilege and outright abuse. His court was described as morally diseased, a place where fear, not love, governed romantic access. Some records claim he imprisoned women who refused him. Others say he used his power to ruin rivals by targeting their wives and daughters. Whether embellished or not, the consistency of these accounts paints a king whose appetites made him despised by both the people and his own barons. The Magna Carta wasn't just a political document. It was a desperate attempt to restrain a monarch whose personal behavior had become a national crisis. And yet, even John had nothing on what came next. 33. Edward II. No English king attracted more venomous poetry than Edward II. His reign collapsed under military disaster, political chaos, and most memorably, favoritism that was anything but subtle. Piers Gaveston, his beloved companion, was elevated to absurd heights, given titles, lands, and indulgences that infuriated the nobility. Their relationship, emotional, possibly romantic, was ridiculed across Europe in biting satire and coded warnings. After Gaveston's execution, Edward's new favorite, Hugh Despenser, triggered another wave of fury. Court records show Despenser operated with ruthless impunity, enriching himself and humiliating the Queen. Isabella, Edward's wife, eventually joined a rebellion to overthrow him, allegedly spurred by both political motives and personal humiliation. Edward's downfall was theatrical, and his final years were spent in prison, his legacy torn to pieces by chroniclers who blamed not just his policies but his passions. His reign forced a nation to confront an uncomfortable question: how personal can a king's life become before the crown itself begins to rot?